3 terrifying signs the narcissist is becoming truly dangerous. And I want to begin by being precise about what dangerous means in this title, because the word is doing something specific here that is different from how it is used in most content about narcissists. And the difference matters enormously for whether what this episode offers you is genuinely useful or simply frightening in a way that produces anxiety without producing the understanding that would allow you to do something constructive with the anxiety. Dangerous in most narcissism content means emotionally harmful, the manipulation, the gaslighting, the reality contestation, the supply-seeking behavior that produces damage to the person in the narcissist orbit. All of that is real, and all of it is genuinely harmful, and none of it should be minimized. But that is not the dangerous this title is pointing at. The dangerous in this title is something more specific and more acute than the ongoing harm of the narcissistic dynamic in its ordinary operation. It is pointing at the specific transition, the observable, identifiable, if you know what to look for, predictable transition, from the narcissist's ordinary harmful functioning to a qualitatively different level of threat that emerges when specific conditions are present. The conditions that produce this transition are not random. They are not the product of the narcissist simply having a bad day, or being in a worse mood than usual, or being under more external stress than ordinary. They are the product of the narcissist's construction, being under the specific kind of pressure that we have discussed in previous conversations. The pressure of supply, insufficiency, narrative failure, and the specific, non-fungible loss that produces the structural stress in the construction that the ordinary management mechanisms are not sufficient to address. When those pressures reach a specific threshold, a threshold that the 3 signs we are about to discuss are the observable indicators of, the narcissist behavior shifts in ways that are qualitatively different from the ordinary harmful functioning, and that require a qualitatively different response from the people in the narcissist's orbit. Understanding the 3 signs is not about producing fear. It is about producing the specific, grounded, information-based awareness that allows the people most at risk, the people who have left or are leaving, the people who are in the process of reducing the narcissist's access to supply, the people whose clarity and independence and genuine thriving are producing the specific, construction-stressing pressures that the signs indicate are approaching the dangerous threshold to make the decisions and take the steps that the situation actually requires. So stay with me, because what we are about to discuss requires the most careful and the most honest handling of everything this channel has covered, and the care and the honesty are in service of your safety, which is the only thing that matters in this conversation. Let's establish what the narcissist's ordinary harmful functioning looks like, because the dangerous is defined by its departure from the ordinary, and you cannot read the departure accurately without a clear picture of the baseline it is departing from. The ordinary harmful functioning of the narcissistic dynamic is characterized by a specific quality of control, not always visible as control, not always experienced as control, but fundamentally organized around the narcissist management of the supply economics and the narrative and the relational landscape in ways that keep the construction functioning with the efficiency it requires. The manipulation is purposeful, the gaslighting is calibrated, the reality contestation is directed at specific perceptions that threaten specific aspects of the construction's narrative. The love bombing and the devaluation cycle, however painful, follows a predictable internal logic that is organized around supply extraction and supply management rather than around the specific person being love-bombed or devalued. All of the ordinary harmful functioning is, at its deepest level, instrumental. It is the construction doing what the construction does to maintain itself, using the people in its orbit as the instruments through which the maintenance occurs. And the instrumental quality of the ordinary harmful functioning, however devastating its effects, contains a specific kind of predictability that the dangerous threshold does not contain. Because the instrumental functioning is organized around the construction and maintenance needs. And maintenance needs, however unreasonable, follow a logic. And logic, however distorted, can be read, can be anticipated, can be navigated with sufficient understanding of what is driving the behavior. The three signs indicate that the instrumental quality is being replaced by something that is not organized around the construction's maintenance needs in the same way. Something that is driven by the construction's distress rather than its management. And distress-driven behavior, in any psychology, is less organized, less predictable, less containable by the ordinary relational strategies that the maintenance-driven behavior responds to. And in the narcissist's specific psychology, distress-driven behavior can be genuinely dangerous in ways that the maintenance-driven behavior, for all its harm, typically is not. The first sign is the specific, observable, pattern-level shift from the narcissist's ordinary supply-seeking behavior to something that looks and feels qualitatively different, something that the people in the narcissist orbit almost universally describe, when they are later given the framework to name what they were experiencing, as desperation. Not the ordinary urgency of the supply-seeking that produces the hoovering sequence or the escalated contact attempts when a supply source is withdrawing. Desperation in a more specifically alarming sense. The quality of someone for whom the usual supply-seeking approaches are not producing sufficient result, and who is responding to that insufficiency not by recalibrating the approach with the efficiency that the ordinary supply-seeking recalibration produces, but by escalating the intensity of whatever the current approach is in a way that has lost the calibration that made the ordinary approach recognizable as a strategy rather than a reaction. The desperation sign is visible in several specific behavioral expressions. Contact attempts that have lost the usual quality of careful timing and strategic deployment, that arrive at hours or in contexts where the calibrated approach would not have deployed them, that repeat with a frequency that exceeds what the calibrated approach would use, that carry an emotional register in their content that is more raw and less managed than the ordinary supply-seeking contact. The social visibility behavior that has escalated past the conspicuous thriving performance into something that has a slightly frantic quality, more frequent, less polished, less organized around a clear supply-generating presentation, and more organized around the sheer volume of presence in the available social landscape. The interactions with people in the narcissist orbit that have a slightly destabilized quality, less smooth than the ordinary management produces, more emotionally charged than the calibrated functioning allows, more specifically, reactive to the specific people and the specific information that is producing the terms. Construction's distress. All of these expressions of the desperation sign are the construction's management capacity, being exceeded by the supply insufficiency in a way that is producing behavior that is increasingly less organized around strategy and increasingly more organized around the urgency of a system that is not getting what it needs and is escalating in the only direction available when the calibrated approach is not producing sufficient result. The desperation sign is the first indicator that the threshold is being approached, and it requires the people in the narcissist orbit to take specific notice and to begin the process of assessing whether the threshold is being approached at a rate that requires immediate action, or whether it is being approached at a rate that allows the more gradual, deliberate repositioning that the situation's eventual requirements will necessitate. The second sign is the one that is most specifically alarming to the people who observe it, because it represents the most direct departure from the construction's ordinary functioning and the most visible indication that the management systems are operating at a level of stress that is producing behavioral outputs that the construction in its ordinary functioning would not produce. It is the collapse of the usual compartmentalization. The narcissist's ordinary functioning depends on the ability to maintain separate presentations in separate contexts, to be the charming, capable, impressive presented self in the social and professional contexts, while the behavior in the intimate relational context is something the social and professional contexts never see. This compartmentalization is one of the most consistent features of the narcissist's ordinary functioning, and one of the most specifically destabilizing features for the people who experience the intimate relational behavior while observing the social and professional, the presentation, the specific disorientation of knowing that what is happening in the private context is completely invisible to the people who encounter the public context and who would not recognize the private behavior as coming from the same person. The compartmentalization requires management resources to maintain. It requires the continuous, careful calibration of what is presented in which context and the specific suppression of the private behavior's expressions in the contexts where those expressions would be damaging to the public presentation. When the management resources are under the specific stress that the construction's approaching dangerous threshold produces, the compartmentalization begins to fail. The private behavior begins appearing in the public contexts. The specific reactions that would ordinarily be contained to the intimate relational context start surfacing in the professional environment, in the social circles, in the interactions with people whose opinion has historically been managed with the careful, polished presentation of the public self. The collapse of compartmentalization is the second sign, and it is the most specifically alarming of the three, because it indicates that the management capacity is under enough stress, that one of the most fundamental maintenance functions of the ordinary functioning, the separation of the private behavior from the public presentation, is no longer being reliably sustained. And when that separation fails, the behavior that was always present in the private context, but contained to it, is now available to emerge anywhere, in any context, with any person. And the anywhere quality of the emerging behavior is the specific feature that marks the second sign's presence as a genuine escalation of the threat level rather than simply a difficult period in the ordinary harmful functioning. And the third sign, which is the most specific and the most directly actionable of the three and penned, the one that most precisely indicates when the threshold has been crossed and what the crossing requires. That is exactly where we are going next. The third sign is the most specific and the most directly actionable of the three, and it requires the most careful handling because it is also the most easily misread in the moment it had. Misread in a direction that increases rather than decreases the risk it represents. The third sign is the specific, observable shift from the narcissist behavior being organized around supply to the narcissist passive behavior being organized around control. And I want to be as precise as possible about what this distinction means in practice, because the difference between supply-organized behavior and control-organized behavior is the most important distinction available in the entire psychology of narcissistic dangerousness. And it is a distinction that most people in the narcissist orbit have never had explained to them clearly enough to recognize it in real time, rather than only in time retrospect when the consequences of having missed it have already materialized. Supply-organized behavior, as we have established across many previous conversations, is behavior that is oriented toward extracting the specific regulatory resource that the breaking construction requires to maintain its functioning. It is aimed at producing a response, admiration, attention, emotional engagement, the specific confirmation of the presented self's significance that keeps the construction's anxiety below the threshold of acute experience. The behavior is instrumental. It is using you as the means through which the supply is generated. But you, in the supply-organized behavior, are still a subject in the narcissist's operational framework. You are the source, the target, the address to which the supply-seeking behavior is directed. You have a function in the framework, and the framework's operation requires your participation as a participant rather than simply your compliance as an object. The transition to control-organized behavior changes this in a way that is qualitatively different and qualitatively more dangerous. Control-organized behavior is not seeking your participation, it is seeking your compliance. And the difference between participation and compliance is the difference between someone who needs you to respond and someone who needs you to submit. Someone who needs you to respond still requires something from you that you have to actively provide. They can be denied it, can be given something other than what they are seeking, can be redirected by the specific quality of the response you choose to provide or not provide. Someone who needs you to submit is not seeking a response. They are seeking the elimination of your capacity to provide anything other than what they are requiring. And the elimination of that capacity, the specific, targeted reduction of your ability to act independently, to choose your own responses, to exist in the dynamic as someone whose choices matter, is the specific thing that the control organized behavior is designed to produce. And the design of it, the specific ways it operates to achieve the elimination of independent capacity, is what makes the third sign the most directly dangerous of the three and the most requiring of the immediate, specific, practically grounded response. The control organized behavior appears in several specific forms that are worth naming, individually because they are individually recognizable, and because recognizing them individually before the pattern is fully assembled is what allows the response to be calibrated to the actual threat level rather than to the more limited understanding that each individual instance, observed in isolation, would support. The first form is the escalation of monitoring into surveillance. The ordinary monitoring that the narcissist maintains of former supply sources and of people currently in their orbit has a specific quality of information gathering. It is reading the baudable landscape for data that is relevant to the supply economics and the narrative maintenance. The surveillance that the control organized behavior produces is different in quality and in purpose. It is not reading the landscape for economically relevant information. It is tracking the specific movements, communications, and relationships of the specific person who is the target of the control, tracking them with a specificity and an intrusiveness that exceeds what information gathering would require, and that is organized around the production of a specific effect in the person being tracked. The effect it is designed to produce is the felt sense of being watched, of the narcissist's presence in your awareness, even in contexts where the narcissist is not physically present, of the specific, low-grade but persistent anxiety of someone who knows their movements are being monitored in ways that exceed what they can fully account for or fully prevent. This felt sense, the anxiety of being surveilled, is itself a form of control. It restricts behavior not through direct prohibition but through the indirect effect of the surveillance's felt presence on the choices the surveilled person makes about where they go, who they talk to, what they do, how freely they operate in their own life. The surveillance is the control-organized behavior's most passive form, and its passivity makes it the most easily overlooked form, the most likely to be rationalized as something other than what it is, the most difficult to name clearly enough to respond to appropriately. But it is the first form, and recognizing it as the first form of the control-organized behavior, rather than as an intensification of the ordinary monitoring, is the recognition that allows the response to be calibrated to the actual third sign, rather than to the more limited threat that the ordinary monitoring represents. The second form of the control-organized behavior is the specific, targeted interference with the external relationships and support structures of the person who is the control target. Not the ordinary social manipulation that the narcissist's functioning has always included, the narrative management, the reputation shaping, the specific cultivation of the social world's perception that has been part of the narcissist's ordinary functioning throughout the relationship. Something more specifically targeted than that, the active, deliberate, specifically aimed disruption of the particular relationships that represent the target's strongest sources of external support and external reality confirmation. The friend who has been most consistently supportive of the target's clarity about the relationship is the specific recipient of a specific effort to introduce doubt about their reliability, their motivations, their perspective. The family member whose support has been most concrete and most protective is the specific target of the most concerted narrative effort. The professional or therapeutic relationship that is most directly supporting the target's capacity for independent functioning receives the most specifically directed undermining effort. The pattern of targeting, the specific selection of the most supportive relationships for the most intensive disruption effort, is what distinguishes this form from the ordinary social manipulation. The ordinary manipulation is broadly aimed at the general social world's perception. The control-organized interference is specifically aimed at the particular structural elements of the target's support system. It is not managing a narrative, it is dismantling a network, and the dismantling of the network is the control-organized behavior, most direct assault on the target's capacity to exist independently of the narcissist. framework, because the network is what makes the independent existence viable. What provides the external confirmation and the practical support and the relational grounding that the independent existence requires. Dismantle the network, and the independent existence becomes considerably more difficult to maintain. And the considerably more difficult to maintain independent existence is the specific mechanism the control-organized behavior is designed to produce. Now here is what all three signs together require of you, because the three signs are not simply information. They are the specific indicators that the situation has reached the threshold where the Durkheimian response needs to change from the responses appropriate to the ordinary harmful functioning, to the responses appropriate to a genuinely dangerous situation. And the responses appropriate to a genuinely dangerous situation are not the responses that most content about narcissism offers, because most content about narcissism is addressing the ordinary harmful functioning and offering the appropriate responses to that, the boundaries, the no contact, the understanding of the dynamic, the healing practices, the development of clarity and self-trust, and the genuinely thriving independent life. All of those responses are appropriate, and all of them remain important, but they are not sufficient when the three signs are present. When the three signs are present, the situation requires something additional and something more specifically practical, and something that this episode needs to be direct about in a way that most content about narcissism is not direct about, because the directness is the most important thing this episode can offer the people who actually need it. When the three signs are present, the situation requires practical safety planning, not psychological framework, not understanding of the dynamic, not the healing practices that address the harm of the ordinary functioning. Practical safety planning, the specific, concrete, real-world steps that reduce the target's vulnerability to the control-organized behavior and increase the target's access to the practical support and the external accountability that the dangerous threshold requires. This means telling specific, trusted people what is happening in specific, concrete terms. It means documenting specific incidents in specific detail with dates and specifics that would be useful if a formal account became necessary. It means consulting with professionals who are specifically qualified to assess and respond to the specific kind of danger that the third sign represents. Not therapists alone, though therapeutic support remains important, but legal professionals, domestic violence advocates, and where the situation warrants it, law enforcement. It means taking the practical steps that the surveillance form of the control-organized behavior requires, the privacy protections, the digital security measures, the specific changes to routines and communications that reduce the surveillance, effectiveness, and its felt presence. And it means taking all of these steps from the specific, grounded, clear-eyed understanding of what the three signs indicate, not from panic, not from the minimization that the narcissist, ordinary management mechanisms have trained into the people closest to them, but from the calm, practical, reality-based assessment that the three signs, when they are present together, are the observable indicators of a threshold that has been crossed, and that the crossing of requires a response that is commensurate with what has crossed it. Your safety is not a framework. It is not a psychological concept. It is the most practical and the most urgent thing this episode can point you toward. And if you are reading this and recognizing the three signs in a situation you are currently navigating, the most important thing this episode can offer you is not a more complete understanding of the narcissist's psychology. It is the clear, direct, unambiguous statement that what you are navigating is real, that the signs you are seeing mean what they mean, that your assessment of the situation is accurate, and that the practical steps required by what you are accurately assessing are the most important thing in your life right now. Please take them. Please tell someone. Please reach out to the people and the organizations that are specifically equipped to help you navigate what the three signs indicate you are navigating. Your clarity about what is happening is not the problem. It is the beginning of the protection. Use it.